Prabhupada was a poet of great renown. I mean, in my estimation, I read a lot. I always have. I've always been, I even majored in literature in college, and I've always been very critical of writers and speakers. And Prabhupada, there was never a time that he gave a lecture or gave a conversation or wrote something that didn't just astound me afterwards, that I could, that I went right to the last word with. And each time I would hear one of his lectures, I realized how he was weaving it like a tapestry, like a fully professional poet would weave a lecture. And then he would just go boom, 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 boom. Thank you very much. Just astounding. I've always appreciated that. He was the wordsmith beyond compare. We can't even begin to emulate that. He said once, when I was Charles Darwin, he said, "Your ancestors might have been cavemen," he said, "but mine were poets." I think one of the other qualifications of pure devotee that Prabhupada always exhibited also was his freedom from desire for material possessions. Basically, Prabhupada was totally renounced. I remember one incident where in Hyderabad, I had met some jewelers who were former jewelers to the Nizam, so they had a collection of fabulous gems, and they wanted me to help sell them in the West. So they gave me on consignment a big necklace about this big of giant rubies, each one this big, beads, and a similar necklace of emeralds that size. I mean, these were worth a fortune. And I brought them back to, and Prabhupada was in his room, so I showed them to him, and I put them around his neck. I said, "Prabhupada, I'd really like to see you in these jewels." And he put his neck, and I put them on. He leaned back, and he had this kind of pleased expression on his face. I said, "Prabhupada, these jewels belong on you." And he said, "Yes, you may leave them here for some time." And then I left. And the next morning they were on his desk. Now you take these out of here. Anytime anyone gave him anything of value, a watch, there wasn't much in the way of anything he would give Prabhupada except a few small things that he wore occasionally. A watch, a ring, these were favorite items, a set of buttons for his shirts or whatever of any value, he would wear them for a few days and then give them to some devotee. Or if somebody gave him something, he would exchange his watch or his ring, something times very valuable. I remember I bought him I was in Switzerland once, and on Bahnhofstrasse I saw the very first limited edition of the quartz digital watches. This was about 1972 or 3, something like that. When they first came out, this guy made the first 1,000 limited edition Gublein. And I bought one. I didn't really have the money, but I spent everything I had buying one of these watches because they look so cool with those red letters on there. Nobody had ever seen these quartz digital letters. All it did is give the time when you pressed the button. That's all. It didn't do anything else. But it was a big gold watch. And I gave it to Prabhupada, and he just loved that watch. He'd sit there and play with it all, show it to everybody. Look, do you want to know what time it is? And it had the hundreds of seconds going on. Click, 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 click. But he, a few days later, he wasn't even wearing it. Somebody else had it. Prabhupada never accumulated anything. He always had everything in full. Krishna provided for him in full. In the books, Prabhupada taught us, and in his lectures, that Krishna is the supreme proprietor of all energies. And that even the small jiva energies are really, we are not the proprietor of our energies. The energy is transcendental. And he not only taught us in our books that, to understand that intellectually, but he exhibited that himself many times. There were times when I thought Prabhupada would just be ready to die from fatigue. You know, we would go from morning to night to all over the world. He would run from one lecture to another in somebody's house, and he'd be looking exhausted, and I'd say, okay, we're going to bed now, Prabhupada. And I'd just get him in his room. Some people would show up out there, and I'd say, well, no, you can't see him just now. You know, there's some ordinary people. Prabhupada would hear him out there, and he'd say, let them come in. And he'd talk into the night with these people about their families and their problems. And he just kept going. And then I'd crash. I'd go to sleep finally. His light would still be on. And I'd wake up at some point, usually with his bell ringing. I always slept in my clothes. And his light would still be on. I never saw him sleep. I can't remember, even in those train compartments when we'd travel together around India in two-bed compartments. I don't remember him looking at him with his eyes closed, sleeping. I would see him sometimes laying there with his eyes closed, but he always knew what was going on around him. I mean, sure enough, as soon as I looked at him, one would open like this. I mean, he was just so aware. So I learned early on that energy is not, we're not, this little body is not the source of our energies. Once it becomes Krishna conscious. As long as it's allied with the material nature, yeah, it's very limited. We can crash in a minute. Crash and burn all the time. But as soon as you start getting wound up about Krishna, I mean, we've seen it. Everyone has seen this happen. Not only with Prabhupada, but with devotees. Look at Malati, how she's overcome her illness through Krishna consciousness. Purely, it's a miracle. No one can believe it. The miracle of modern medicine. Nobody can understand it. Once Prabhupada in London, I think others have maybe talked about this incident. I was sleeping outside of his room in Berry Place, and I heard in my dreams, I heard very faintly, Shama Sundar. And I crashed awake like this and hit the bunk. I was on the lower bunk of a wooden bunk bed, and crashed my head on the bunk above me and staggered out. And the door was just opening when I got to it, and Prabhupada was standing there, reeling, and then he just collapsed in my arms. My God, I just was stunned. I didn't know what in the world to do. And I picked him up, and it was like he didn't weigh anything. There was no weight. He felt like a little pillow or something. Absolutely no weight whatsoever. And eyes were closed and gray-faced. And I went over to his bed, and I laid him down, and he was shivering. So I began to heap blankets over him. And then he opened his eyes and said, I'm cold. So I went over and I turned the heat up as far as it would go and got some more blankets and covered him up. And I just didn't know what to do. You know, I didn't know whether to call a hospital, get an ambulance, what was going on. And he said, bring a little black pepper paste. He told me how to make it or something. So I ran down the kitchen and brought us up and put it on his head, his forehead. And he says, now you just lay down there and sleep. No hospital. And I ran around. His room was right over the temple room. So I ran around to the pujaris and woke him up. And I said, look, at Mangala Arati, which is in about an hour, no bells, just quiet, no singing loud. Prabhupada needs to rest. So he slept probably 5 hours or so. He got up. I slept right on the floor there. I didn't really sleep, I don't believe. I think I stayed awake most of the night just watching. His breathing was deep but normal. But even then, he wasn't sleeping. Every time I would get really, really worried and look up at him, his eyes would open. Like, I'm okay. And then in the morning, he got up, said, it's time for our morning walk. And carried on as if nothing happened. Now you tell me where that energy comes from. It's not possible. And I saw it so many times. Immediately friend of everyone is one of the prominent, attractive